live. So, hello, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be in the world. Good to see you. Good to have you here with me. I'm Tad. It is 1 o'clock in the morning, well, 1:01 to be precise, here in California. And wherever you are in the world, it is exactly the right time for you to be there. Let me just make my eyeballs straight. Okay. Anyway, anything specific? Yeah, I'm grinding through the last bits of the Navigator's Children. I have dealt with a number of crucial um, things that I had to write. I will tell you a little secret. I hate writing action sequences. I hate writing action sequences, not because I don't like them in and of themselves. I like them fine, especially in other people's books or other people's movies or other people's television shows. But it's not my favorite thing to write for a number of reasons. One, because it's difficult. Yeah, I know that sounds like cowardly and sad and pathetic for somebody who's writing for a living. And especially somebody who's writing science fiction and fantasy, which are a type of genre adventure fiction, both of them that pretty much thrives on action sequences. But early on in the process, I realized that, and by early on in the process, I'm not talking about the Navigator's Children. I'm talking about when I first got into the biz back in the 1980s, when the world was young and dinosaurs roamed the earth still. Early on, when I kind of got into the business, I realized that I am not one of those people who's fascinated by warfare for its own sake. I am not fascinated by combat for its own sake. I am interested in the effect of these things on the people involved because I'm interested in people. I am interested as a writer in the fact that oftentimes these physical conflicts, whether they are large scale like war, or they're small scale like two people having a fight, are crucial to telling stories, and so there's no escaping them. And again, especially if you're writing genre fiction, adventure fiction, whatever you want to call the kind of thing where stuff like that happens. But I don't actually enjoy that stuff by itself all that much. So very early on, I made a decision that I was going to, instead of taking the position of something that I'm not, which is an aficionado or a student of the history of hand-to-hand combat or war or whatever. Not that I'm not, I'm a student of history, so I know a lot about war and conflict, but I always much more interested on how it felt, and so I'm much more likely to read something that, instead of telling the story of a conflict from a sort of godlike perspective of strategy and tactics, I'm much more likely to be interested in the recollections of people who are actually involved in these things and what it actually felt like to them at the time. So anyway, to get back to what I was talking about in the first place, so I don't look forward to writing action sequences unless they are, something that for some reason I really need to get written, and, so I'm looking forward to them in the sense of like finishing a job. Like the old joke about somebody hitting themselves on the head over and over again with a stick, and somebody says, "Why are you doing that? That must feel terrible." I go, "Yeah, but it feels so good when I stop." In that sense, I guess I look forward to these things somewhat. But so anyway, so I had one of those that I had to write, and I blocked and reblocked it for days in my head as I was working on other things, and I kept thinking, how can I make this work? And anyway, so I finally got that written today, and it was an agonizing 5 pages. Normally I can knock off 5 pages, no problem. But it was just an agonizing 5 pages, and I didn't, it was one of those things where I started it and I went away and I came back and I wrote a little more and didn't like it, and deleted most of it and started it over again and wrote a little more and deleted it, and finally went and like took a nap for half an hour, came back and wrote it. I have no idea. I'm not even going to tell you. Excuse me. I'm not going to tell you what the scene is because, for one thing, it may not make it into the final. In its current form, it may not make it into the final version of the book. It may be grossly rewritten by the time it actually hits print. So I don't want people going, "Oh, I see why it was like why he said he was so frustrated with it, because it really sucks," and have it turn out to be something that I thought, no, I've rewritten it. It's perfect. I really like it. So I'm not going to tell you what it was. Obviously, it's near the end of the book. And it's not in and of itself a super huge critical scene. It's just, it happened to be an action sequence where things happen and people hit other people with things and, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I just, it was like one of these things that just hung over me for days and I couldn't get it. And I think I finally at least knocked it off enough to have moved through it. And now I can get on to the next critical sequence. And I'm really almost out of critical sequences. That's the good news from the writer's point of view, is that I really only have three. I've got three major sequences left. And, that in terms of how many pages that is not that many, because, it's 5, 6, 7 pages of manuscript for each of those. And there'll be a couple of other things too. So I'm not quite done, but I'm almost done with the book. But just mainly I got that one out of the way. Now I just have a couple more, and then I'll be done with the rough draft. And then I'll have to polish it up before I can let anybody look at it, because there's like notes in it and things, and literally, I will write to myself in red font. This sucks. Fix this. Do we really want blah, blah? There's just, it's full of notes and things. So that's what's coming up before I can send it off to anybody, including my publishers, because I wouldn't want anybody. I used to do really, really clean first drafts, and I would not let anybody see them. But with these books, because I've had help, including help from several people who are regular habitués of these readings, which many of you have probably figured out by now, because I have help from several people who know the Ostenard books better than I do, I had to start letting people see earlier versions of the first drafts. And that was painful. That was extremely painful. It was, because you don't want to show anybody something when you're not finished with it. But I especially don't like showing people things when I know that it's just riddled with things I'm going to change, things that I wasn't happy with when I was writing. But, you just kind of have to finish it up. It's very difficult. I have to say, it's very difficult, for at least for me, to let people look at something when I know already it's full of things that I don't like and that I will have to fix at some point. It's really like having a giant "kick me" sign taped to one's back. You're sending out a version of the story that, even though you've spent a huge amount of time working on it, it's not what it's supposed to be. It's, it's got all kinds of stuff in there that it's incomplete, or it's a placeholder, or, you went, or like I have done at times, it's like, okay, I need an action sequence here. This has to be resolved by somebody fighting with somebody else. And so I've just kind of cranked something out saying, I haven't had a chance to block it through properly. I'll figure it out later when I come back to it again. So anyway, so that was my thing for today. It was just like, I just need to break the back of this one action sequence. Something has to happen. I have to get through it enough that I can move on and do other stuff. So I'm in a good mood because I managed to do that after several days of agonizing. Anyway, okay, so what else to tell you guys about? Not really much of anything. Life has been pretty normal. Deb and I and my brothers are back and forth to our parents' house to, kind of hang with my dad and stuff like that. which has meant the writing is a little fractured sometimes. It's a little hard for me to work in a different environment. I can do it, but it's not easy, and it means I have to take all kinds of stuff with me because I use a special keyboard and all these kinds of things. But no complaints, really. We're still hassling with various other things, and life is complicated and confusing, but whatever. When is life not complicated and confusing? I ask you. And everything else is pretty much normal. There's cat sleeping behind me, as you can see, and there are dogs upstairs being well behaved for once. And everybody else in the household, I think, is asleep. So it's just me and you. And so I'm going to go ahead, and since I don't have that much to say this week, although I've still managed to waste 10 minutes, I'm going to say hello to everybody, and then I am going to start reading. Continue with the Dragonbone chair. So, who have we got? Excuse me, I'm Yanni for some reason. Not Yanni, the 70s New Age or 80s New Age musician, I hasten to say. Yanni as in yawn, Y-A-W-N hyphen Y. I'm full of yawns. I don't know why. Anyway, who is here checking in? Isaac. Isaac is checking in from Utah. Hello. Good to see you, Isaac. Debbie, good morning from gray and stormy Norfolk. I'm sorry to hear it's gray and stormy. Well, actually, I'm not necessarily because, I don't mind gray and stormy. When I lived in England, I was actually quite happy. I am not, I've said this many times, I'm not a hot weather guy. I'm not a sun worshiping kind of guy. As I've also said many times, all of my ancestors seem to be from dark, cold places. You can see that I don't get much sun even here in California because I just don't like it that much. So I was pretty happy in England, actually, because let's face it, there's not a lot of pressure to go outside and do things other than write when it's gray and miserable out. And, it's often gray and miserable in England. And I was fine with that. Anyway, so that's Debbie checking in from gray and stormy Norfolk. Chris, good morning. Good to see you. Anamika, hello, hello. Good to see you too. Good morning. Kristen, hello. How are you? Becky, hello, hello. I'm glad you're looking forward to the reading. Cliff, hello. I hope I'm doing well too. Kids and you saw Jeremy at the Santa Clara Library Comic Con today. Excellent. And good to hear that you're getting out to a Comic Con with your kids. I haven't done that for quite a few years now. But part of that is because my kids are now old enough to go off to things like this on their own, and they don't want their dad around while they're hanging with all of their friends. Penny, hello, good to see you. Wouter, good evening, good morning, and also from Iris, good. I will jump into the reading soon, so at least you'll get some of it before the family shows up. Mark checks in from Misty, Yorkshire. Sean is checking in at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere. That's very true. Christy, good morning from Ogres, Michigan. I have no idea how you pronounce the name of that particular part of Michigan. But then again, I'm probably not pronouncing Michigan right either, since it's God only knows where the word comes from, probably Ojibwa or something. I know it's a Native American name of some kind. Petra, good morning, good morning. Good to see you too. And who else is here? Nicole, hello, good morning. Ilva, hello, darling. Just realized there's a new Pixies album out. Ooh, nice. And I even got priority over the Pixies, so I'm impressed. Pixies are good stuff. Christina, hello, good morning. Quarantined at home with COVID. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear it. Thankfully, the symptoms are mild. Good, glad to hear it. Ilva wants to know when I roughly expect to have it out to her, because Ilva is one of those people that, of course, I was mentioning, one of my Ostenard experts, one of my Ostenard curators. Good question. I will let you know as soon as I finish how long I think it will take me to do the polish. But I would think before Christmas. I think I'll be done with the rough draft in the next week or two at the most. Well, 2 weeks at the most. Sean, as Doctor of International Relations and an historian with personal experience in strategy and tactics. Okay. So, all right. Thank you, Sean. I feel better. That's good to hear. Let me see who else I haven't said hello to. Suzanne, hello. Little late this morning. That's quite all right. As you can see, I haven't started yet. Yes, Suzanne says it's misty in her part of Yorkshire as well. Svanto says Guten Morgen. And I say same to you. And Anthony Merriman, good morning. Good to see you from the middle of nowhere. I am not one of those Californians who believes everything before the East Coast is a flyover state. I have lots of friends in Ohio, and I have family in Indiana. So, Bloomington, in fact, a very fine part of the family that I don't get to see anymore because everybody has grown up and gone off their different ways, and all of the relatives who linked us together back in the early days have since passed on. And so the two parts of the family have mostly split apart, as they do tend to do sometimes. Anyway, so what we were reading when last was Simon and Benedict being chased through the forest by weird white hounds. And they managed to survive the first attack, in part by Benedict tricking the hounds into running off of a cliff, a precipice, for lack of a better word. And that's what's happening at the moment. And Benedict is trying to take Simon to someone named Jaloy. And at this point in the story, for any of you out there who haven't read it, that is all we know about Jaloy. Is that, well, no, that she's a wise woman. That's what Benedict has told him. Benedict laboriously turned the dog over with his foot. It was one he had killed with a dart. The cotton wadding sprouted from the smooth white fur of the creature's neck like a tiny mushroom. "See there," the troll said. Simon leaned a little closer. It was not like any hunting hound he had ever seen. The slender muzzle and underslung jaw reminded him more of the sharks that fishermen pulled thrashing from the Kinslaw. The opalescent white eyes, now staring sightlessly, seemed windows of some inner disease. "No, look there," Benedict pointed. On the dog's chest, burned black through the short hairs, was a slender triangle with a narrow base. It was a branded mark like the kind that the Thrithings men burnt into the flanks of their horses with flame-heated spears. "That sign is for Stormspike," Benedict said quietly. "It is the mark of the Norns. And they are a strange people. Their country is north even of Cannock and Rimmersgard. A great mountain is there, very tall and with a covering of snow and ice, called Stormspike by the Rimmersmen. The Norns do not travel in the fields of Ostenard. Some are saying that they are Scythi, but I do not know if that is truth." "How can that be?" Simon asked. "Look at the collar." He leaned down, gingerly pushing a finger under the white leather to lift it away from the stiffening flesh of the dead hound. Benedict smiled sheepishly. "Shame to me. I overlooked the collar. White against white as it is. Me, taught since child age to hunt in snow." "But look at it," Simon urged. "See the buckle?" The buckle of the collar was indeed an interesting thing, a piece of hammered silver in the shape of a coiling dragon. "That's the dragon of Elias's kennels," Simon said firmly. "I should know. I used to visit Tobias the houndkeeper often." Benedict crouched, staring at the carcass. "I believe you. And as for the mark of Stormspike,
It is only necessary to look for seeing that these dogs are not things raised in your hayhold."
He stood up and stepped back a pace. Kantaka moved in to sniff at the body, then quickly backed away with a rumbling growl.
"A mystery whose solving must wait," the troll said. "Now we are very lucky to have our lives, with all of our limbs as well. We should be moving again. I have no wish to meet this hound's master."
"Are we close to Jaloi?"
"Somewhat. We have been driven off our route, but not beyond repairing. If we leave now, we should still outrun the darkness."
Simon looked down at the long snout and vicious jaw of the hound, at its powerful body and filming eye.
"I hope so," he said.
They could find no way to cross the canyon anywhere, and reluctantly decided to move back down the long slope and look for another easier descent than the sheer rock face before them. Simon was almost childishly happy not to have to climb down. His knees still felt weak, as if he'd had a fever. He had no wish to look down into the canyon's maw again with nothing beneath him but a long, long fall. It was one thing to climb the walls and towers of the hayhold with their square corners and mason's cracks. A tree trunk suspended like a frail twig over nothingness was another story entirely. At the base of the long slope, an hour later, they turned to their right hand and began to track around to the northwest. They had not gone more than 5 furlongs when a high-pitched, wailing cry knifed through the afternoon air. They both stopped short. Kantaka pricked her ears and growled. The sound came again.
"It sounds like a child screaming," Simon declared, turning his head to locate the noise's source. "The forest is often playing such tricks," Benedict began. The keening noise rose again. Quickly afterward came an angry baying that they knew all too well. "Kinkipa's eyes!" Benedict cursed. "Will they chase us all the way to Nagleman?" The baying rose again, and he listened. "It has the sound of one dog only. However, that is something lucky." "It sounds like it's coming from down there." Simon pointed to where the trees grew more densely some distance away. "Let's go and see." "Simon!" Benedict's voice was harsh with surprise. "What thing are you saying? We are fleeing to keep our lives." "You said it sounded like only one. We have Kantaka. Someone's being attacked. How can we run away?" "Simon, we do not know if that crying is a trick, or an animal it could be." "What if it isn't?" Simon demanded. "What if that thing has caught some woodsman's child or something?" "A woodsman's child? This far from the forest's edge?" Benedict stared at him in frustration for a moment. Simon returned the gaze defiantly. "Ha!" Benedict said heavily. "So it will be then, as you are wishing." Simon turned and began jogging toward the thickening trees. "Mikmok hanosogujik," we say in Gekanok, Benedict called. "If you wish to carry a hungry weasel in your pocket, it is your choice." The youth did not look back. Benedict slapped the ground with his walking stick, then trotted after him. He caught up to Simon within 100 paces. Within 20 more, he had opened his staff to shake loose his dart bag. He hissed a command to bring the racing Kantaka back, then deftly rolled coarse wool around one of the dark-tipped darts as he ran. "Couldn't you get poisoned if you tripped and fell?" Simon asked. Benedict shot him a sour, worried look as he struggled to keep up. When they came upon the scene at last, its appearance was deceptively innocent. A dog crouching before a spreading ash tree, staring up at a dark shape huddled on a branch overhead. It might have been one of the Hayholt Castle hounds with a treed cat, except that both dog and quarry were far larger. They were less than 100 paces away when the dog turned toward them. It skinned back its lips and barked, a vicious raw bray of sound. It looked back at the tree for a moment, then straightened long legs and loped toward them. Benebik slowed and stopped, raising his hollow tube to his lips. Kantaka trotted past him. As the hound closed the gap, the troll puffed out his cheeks and blew. If the dart struck, the dog gave no sign. Instead, it sped forward, growling, and Kantaka charged to meet it. This hound, was even bigger than the others, as large or even a little larger than Kantaka herself. The two animals did not circle, but flung themselves together, jaws snapping. A moment later, they tumbled to the ground, snarling, a heaving, spinning ball of gray and white fur. At Simon's side, Benebik cursed sharply. His leather packet fell from his hand in his haste to wind another dart. The ivory needles scattered into the leaves and moss underfoot. The snarls of the combatants had risen to a higher pitch. The long white head of the hound lunged in and out, once, twice, thrice, like a striking viper. The last time it came back with blood on its pale muzzle. Simon and the troll were trotting toward them when Benebik made a strange choking noise. "Kantaka!" he cried and sped forward. Simon saw the flash of Benebik's bone-handled blade. Then a moment later, incredibly, the troll cast himself onto the writhing, snapping animals and brought the knife down, raised it, and struck again. Simon, fearing for the lives of both his companions, snatched the hollow tube from where Benebik had dropped it and ran forward. He arrived in time to see the troll brace himself, grab the thick gray fur of Kantaka's back, and pull. The two animals slid apart. There was blood on each of them. Kantaka slowly stood, favoring a leg. The white hound lay silent. Benebik crouched and put an arm around the wolf's neck, pressing his forehead to hers. Simon, oddly touched, walked away from them to the tree. The first surprise was that there were two figures up in the branches of the white ash. A wide-eyed youth who held a smaller, silent figure in his lap. The second surprise was that Simon knew the larger of the two. "It's you!" He stared up in astonishment at the grime-streaked and bloody face. "You! Malachias!" The boy said nothing, but gazed down with haunted eyes, gently rocking the small figure in his lap. For a moment, the forest copse was silent and unmoving, as though the afternoon sun above the trees had been arrested in its progress. Then the blare of a horn shattered the quiet. "Quickly!" Simon called up to Malachias. "Down! You must come down!" Benebik came up behind him with a limping Kantaka. "Huntsman's horn, I am sure," was all he said. Malachias, as if comprehending at last, began sliding up the long branch toward the trunk, holding his small companion carefully. When he reached the crotch, he hesitated a moment, then handed the limp burden down to Simon. It was a little dark-haired girl, aged no more than 10 years. She was unmoving, eyes closed in her too pale face. When Simon took her, he felt something sticky all across the front of her rough dress. A moment later, Malachias lowered himself down from the branch, falling the last few feet and tumbling, getting up almost immediately. "What now?" Simon asked, trying to balance the little girl against his chest. The horn echoed again somewhere on the canyon rim they had left behind, and now there rose the excited squalling of more hounds as well. "We cannot fight men and dogs along with them," the troll said, exhaustion plain on his slack face. "Horses we cannot outrun. We must hide ourselves." "How?" Simon demanded. "The dogs will smell us." Benebik leaned forward and took Kantaka's injured paw in his small hand, bending it back and forth. The wolf resisted for a moment, then sat, panting, as the little man finished his manipulations. Painful it is, but not broken, he told Simon, then turned to speak to the wolf. Malachias lifted his gaze from Simon's burden to stare. Chok, Kantaka, my brave friend, the troll said. Omuchak Jaloi. The wolf rumbled deep in her chest, then leaped away at once to the northwest, away from the rising clamor behind them. Favoring the bloodied front leg, she was gone from view among the trees in a matter of moments. I am hoping, Benebik explained, that the confusion of scents here, he gestured to the tree and then to the huge hound lying nearby, will distract them, and that the scent they will follow may be Kantaka's. I think they cannot catch her, even lamed. Too smart she is. Simon looked around. How about there? He asked, pointing to a crevice in the hillside, formed by a great rectangle of streaked stone that had broken loose and fallen back as though split by a vast wedge. Except that we do not know which direction they will take, Benebik said. If they come down the hillside, that will be luck for us. If they are descending farther back, they will ride right past the hole there. Too much risk. Simon found it hard to think. The din of the approaching hounds was fearsome. Was Benebik right? Were they to be chased all the way to Naglemund? Not that they could run much longer, weary and battered as they were. There, he said suddenly. Another finger of rock thrust up through the forest floor some distance away, 3 times the height of a man. Trees grew close about its base, surrounding it like young children helping their grandfather hobble to the supper table. If we can climb up that, Simon said, we will be above even the ones on horses. Yes, Benebik said, nodding his head. Right, you are right. Come, let us climb. He made for the outcropping, the silent Malachias just behind him. Simon readjusted the little girl against his body and hurried after. Benebik scrambled up partway and clung to the branch of a close-leaning tree as he turned. Pass the little one to me. Simon did, extending his arms to their full reach, then turned to put a guiding hand on the elbow of Malachias, who was looking for an initial toehold. The boy shook off Simon's helpful gesture and climbed carefully upward. Simon was last. When he got to the first ledge, he picked up the still figure of the little girl and gently slung her over his shoulder, then made his way up to the rock's rounded top. He lay down with the others among the leaves and twigs, hidden from the ground by a screen of branches. His heart thudded from exhaustion and fear. He had, it seemed, been running and hiding forever. Even as they squirmed, trying to find comfortable positions for all 4 bodies, the yammering of the dogs rose to a hideous pitch. A moment later, the woods below were full of darting white shapes. Simon left the little girl clutched in Malachias's arms and quietly pulled himself forward until he could join Benebik at the outcropping's edge, peering with the troll through a gap in the foliage. The dogs were everywhere, sniffing, barking. There were at least a score of them running excitedly back and forth between the tree, the body of their fellow, and the base of the outcropping. One of them seemed to stare directly up at Simon and Benebik, empty white eyes gleaming, red mouth grinning fiercely. A moment later, it trotted back to join its lathered companions. The horn sounded nearby. Within a minute, a line of horses appeared, picking their way down the densely wooded hillside. Now the dogs had a 4th corner to their circuit and ran braying between the stone-gray legs of the lead horse, who walked on as calmly as if they were moths. The trailing horses were not quite so sanguine. One immediately behind shied a little, and its master cut it out of line, spurring it down the last short slope to bring it to a pacing, sputtering halt near the outcropping. The rider was young and clean-shaven, with a strong chin and curling hair the color of his chestnut horse. He wore a blue and black surcoat over his silvery armor, with a design of 3 yellow flowers set diagonally from shoulder to waist. His expression was sour. "Another one dead?" he spat. "What do you make of this, Jaeger?" His voice took on a sarcastic tone. "Oh, pardon me, I meant Master Ingen." Simon was amazed at how clear the man's words were, as though he spoke directly to the hidden listeners. He held his breath. The armored man was staring at something out of their view, and his profile suddenly seemed very familiar. Simon felt sure he had seen this man somewhere, most likely at the Hayholt. He was certainly an Erkenlander by his accent. "It is not important what you call me," another voice said, a deep, smooth, cold voice. "You did not make Ingen Jaeger master of this hunt. You are here as courtesy, Hayforth, because these are your lands." Simon realized that the first man was Baron Hayforth, a regular at Elias's court and a crony of Earl Fengbald. The second speaker rode his gray horse into the gap through which Simon and Benedict stared. Agitated white dogs twined in and out around the horse's hooves. The man called Ingen was dressed all in black, his surcoat, breeches, and shirt all the same bleak, lusterless shade. At first he looked to be white-bearded. A moment later it was apparent that the close-cropped whiskers on the hard face were a yellow so light as to be nearly colorless as his eyes, faint pale spots in his dark face. They might be blue. Simon stared at the cold face framed in the black coif, at the powerful, thick-muscled body, and felt a fear different than any he had felt this whole dangerous day. Who was this man? He looked like a Rimmersman. His name was a Rimmersgard name, but he spoke strangely, with slow, strange accents Simon had never heard. "My lands ended at the forest's edge," Hayforth said, and turned his balking mount back into place. Half a dozen men in light armor had filed down into the clearing behind and sat their horses waiting. "And where my lands ended," Hayforth continued, "my patients did too. This is a farce. Dead dogs scattered about like chaff. And 2 prisoners escaped," Ingen finished heavily. "Prisoners!" Hayforth scoffed. "A little boy and girl. Do you think these are the traitors Elias is so anxious to get? Do you think such a pair," he tipped his head toward the carcass of the great hound, "did that? The dogs have been chasing something." Ingen Jaeger stared down at the dead mastiff. Look at the wounds. This was no bear, no wolf that did this. It is our quarry, and he is still running. And now, thanks to your stupidity, our prisoners are running also." "How dare you?" Baron Hayforth said, his voice rising. "How dare you? With one word I could have you sprouting arrows like a hedgehog." Ingen looked slowly up from the body of the hound. "But you will not," he said quietly. Hayforth's horse shied back, rearing, and when the Baron had mastered him, the 2 men stared at each other for a moment. Very well, then," Hayforth said. A different note had crept into his voice as he looked away from the black-clad man to stare out across the forest. "What now?" "The dogs have a scent," Ingen said. "We will do what we must do. Follow." He raised the horn that swung at his side and winded it once more. The dogs, who had been swarming about at the edge of the clearing, gave throat and sped off in the direction Kantaka had disappeared. Ingen Jaeger spurred his tall gray horse after them without a word. Baron Hayforth, cursing, waved to his men and followed. Within the course of 100 heartbeats, the woods below the outcropping were empty and silent once more. But Benedict kept them all in place for some time before he would let them climb down. Once on the ground, he quickly examined the little girl. opening her eyes with a delicate, stubby finger, leaning close to listen to her breathing. Very bad she is, this one. What is her name, Malachias? Lilith, the boy said, staring at the pale face. My sister. Our only hope is to quickly get her to the house of Jeloi, Benebik said, and hope also that Kantaka has led those men astray, so that we are reaching it alive. What are you doing out here, Malachias? Simon demanded. And how did you get away from Hayfirth? The boy did not answer, and when Simon asked again, he turned his head away. Questions for later, Benebik said, standing. Quickness we need now. Can you carry this girl child, Simon? They made their way northwest through the dense forest, the lowering sun lancing through the branches. Simon asked the troll about the man named Ingen and his odd way of speaking. Black Rimmersmen, I am thinking, Benebik said. They are a rare lot, not often seen except at northernmost settlements, where they sometimes come to trade. They do not speak the language of Rimmersgard. It is said they live on the fringes of the lands belonging to the Norns. The Norns again, Simon grunted, ducking beneath a branch that had sprung from Malachias's careless hand. He turned to confront the troll. What is going on? Why should such people be concerned with us? Perilous times, friend Simon, Benebik said. Through perilous times we are passing. Several hours went by, and the shadows of afternoon grew longer and longer. The patches of sky that glimmered through the treetops turned slowly from blue to shell pink. The three walked on. The land was mostly level, from time to time sloping away like a shallow beggar's bowl. In the branches above, squirrels and jays carried on their endless arguments. Crickets droned in the leaf tangle at their feet. Once, Simon saw a large gray owl scudding like a phantom through the twining branches overhead. Later he saw another, so like the first as to have been its twin. Benebik watched the sky carefully when they passed through clearings and jogged them a little to the east. Soon they reached a small forest stream that gurgled past 1,000 tiny breakwaters of fallen branches. They walked through the thick grasses that lined its banks for a while. When the bulk of a tree blocked their passage, they stepped out and made their way past on the backs of the stones dotting the stream's gentle course. The stream bed became Start that one again. The stream bed became wider as another small waterway entered, and within moments Benebik raised a hand to bring them to a stop. They had just rounded a bend in the watercourse. Here the stream suddenly dropped away, rushing in a tiny waterfall down a series of rock slabs. They stood on the rim of a great bowl, a sloping expanse of trees leading down to a wide, dark lake. The sun had dipped out of sight, and in the insect-humming twilight, the water looked purple and deep. Tree roots twisted down into the water like snakes. There was an air of stillness about the lake, of quiet secrets whispered only to the endless trees. At the far side, dim and difficult to see in the gathering darkness, a tall thatched hut stood over the water in such a way that at first it seemed to float on air. A moment later, Simon could see that it was raised above the lake's surface on stilts. Buttery light gleamed in the two small windows. The house of Jeloi, Benebik said, and they started down into the tree-lined bowl. With a soundless rush of wings, a gray shape tore loose from the trees above them and glided out to circle low over the lake 2 times, then vanish into the darkness beside the cottage. For a moment, Simon thought he saw the owl pass into the cottage, but his eyelids were heavy from exhaustion, and he could not see clearly. The cricket's night song rose above them as the shadows deepened. A bounding shape came speeding around the lake's rim toward them. Kantaka! Benedict laughed and ran down to meet her. Chapter 26. In the House of Jaloi. The figure that stood framed in the warm light of the doorway did not move or speak as the companions mounted the long board bridge that slanted from the doorstep to the lake's edge. As Simon followed Benedict up, carefully cradling the child Lilith, he could not help wondering why this Jaloi woman did not have an entranceway of a more permanent nature, something at least with a rope handrail. His weary feet were having trouble keeping to the narrow bridge. I suppose she doesn't get many visitors, for one thing, he thought, looking out across the rapidly darkening forest. Benedict pulled up short of the front step and bowed, almost bumping Simon off into the still waters. "Valada Jaloi," he announced. "Binbainis Mintahokis requests your aid. I bring travelers." The figure in the doorway stepped back, leaving the way open. "Spare me the Nabanai constructions, Benedict." It was a harshly musical voice, heavily and strangely accented, but unmistakably a woman's. "I knew it was you. Kantaka has been here an hour." At the shore end of the ramp, the wolf pricked her ears forward. "Of course you are welcome. Do you think I would deny you?" Benedict entered the house. Simon, a step behind, spoke up. "Where shall I put the little girl?" He ducked through the door, getting a quick impression of a high roof and long fluttering shadows cast by the flames of many candles. Then Jaloi stepped in front of him. She was dressed in a rough robe of dun cloth, clumsily tied with a belt. Her height was somewhere between Simon's and the troll's. Her face, wide and sun-browned, seamed with wrinkles at both the eyes and mouth. Her dark hair was shot all through with gray and cut short so that she looked almost like a priest. But it was her eyes that caught him. Round, heavy-lidded yellow eyes with large jet-black pupils. They were old, knowing eyes, as though they belonged to some ancient bird of the heights, and there was a power behind them that fixed him in his tracks. She seemed to measure him completely, to turn him inside out and shake him like a sack all in a moment. When her gaze at last flicked down to the injured girl, he felt drained, like an empty wineskin. "This child is hurt." It was not a question. Simon helplessly let her take Lilith from his arms as Benedict came forward. "She has been attacked by dogs," the troll said. "Dogs with the brand of Storm Spike." If he expected a look of surprise or fear, he was disappointed. Jaloi pushed briskly past to a straw pallet on the floor where she laid the girl down. "Find food if you are hungry," she said. "I must work now. Were you followed?" Benedict was hurriedly telling her of the most recent events, Jaloi all the while undressing the unresponsive body of the child, when Malachias finally entered. He squatted down near the pallet, hovering as Jaloi cleaned Lilith's wounds. When Malachias leaned too close, blocking her movements, the Valada gently touched the boy's shoulder with a sun-freckled hand. She held the contact, staring at him for a moment until Malachias glanced up and flinched. After a moment he raised his eyes to Jaloi's once more, and something seemed to pass silently between them before Malachias turned away and sat back against the wall. Benedict poked up the fire, ingeniously set in a deep well in the floor. The smoke, there was surprisingly little, rose up to the ceiling. Simon imagined there must be a chimney hidden in the shadows overhead. The cottage itself, which was really one large room, reminded him in many ways of Morghenes's study chambers. Many strange objects were hung on the clay-plastered walls, leafy branches tied in careful sheaves, bags of dried flowers spilling their petals, and stalks, reeds, and long, slippery roots that looked as though they had come grudgingly from the lake below. The firelight also flickered across a multitude of tiny animal skulls, limning their bright polished surfaces without penetrating the darkness of the eyes. One entire wall was divided between floor and ceiling by a waist-high shelf of frame-stretched bark. It, too, was covered with curious objects, animal pelts and tiny bundles of sticks and bones, beautiful water-smoothed rocks of every shape and color, and a carefully stacked aggregation of scrolls, handles facing out like a cord of firewood. It was so cluttered that it took Simon a moment to realize it was not really a shelf at all, but a writing table. Beside the scrolls was a stack of vellum and a quill pen in an inkwell made from another animal skull. Kantaka whined softly and nosed against his thigh. Simon scratched her muzzle. There were cuts on her face and ears, but the fur had been carefully cleaned of dried blood. He turned from the table to the wide wall that faced out on the lake with its two small windows. The sun was gone now, and the candlelight streaming out made two long irregular rectangles on the water. Simon could see his own gangly silhouette in one of them, like the pupil of a bright eye. "I have warmed some soup," Benedict said behind him, and offered a wooden bowl. "I have need of it myself," the troll smiled, "and so do you, and everyone else. I hope to never have another day the like of this." Simon blew on the hot liquid, then sucked a little past his lips. It was tangy and a little bitter, like mulled Elysiumanza cider. "It's good," he said, and sipped a little more. "What is it?" "Better that you are not asking, perhaps," Benedict grinned mischievously. Jaloi looked up from the pallet, eyebrows slanting down to the bridge of her sharp nose, and fixed Benedict with a penetrating glance. "Stop that, troll! You'll give the boy stomach pains," she snorted irritably. "Honeylock, dandelion, and stonegrass is all that's in it, boy." Benedict seemed chastened. "Apologies, Falada." "I like it," Simon said, worried that he had somehow offended her, even if only as the recipient of Benedict's teasing. "Thank you for taking us in. My name is Simon." "Ah," grunted Jaloi, then turned back to cleansing the little girl's injuries. Nonplussed, Simon finished his broth as quietly as he could. Benedict took the bowl and refilled it. He finished that one almost as quickly. Benedict began combing Kantaka's thick pelt with his stubby fingers, tossing the burrs and twigs he worked loose into the fire. Jaloi was silently applying dressings to Lelith while Malachias looked on, lank black hair hanging in his face. Simon found a relatively uncluttered place to lean against the cottage wall. A legion of crickets and other night singers filled the night's hollow spaces as Simon slid into exhausted sleep, his heart beating along in slow time. It was still night when he awoke. He bobbed his head stupidly, trying to clear away the sticky residue of a too short sleep. It took a moment of peering around the unfamiliar room until he remembered where he was. Jaloi and Benedict were quietly talking, the woman on a high stool, the troll cross-legged at her feet like a student. Behind them on the pallet lay a dark, bumpy shape that Simon at last recognized as Malachias and Lelith huddled together in sleep. "It doesn't matter whether you were clever or not, young Benedict," the woman was saying. "You have been lucky, which is a better thing." Simon decided to let them know he was awake. "How's the little girl?" he asked, yawning. Jaloi turned her hooded stare toward him. "Very bad. Badly wounded and feverish. The Norn hounds. Well, it is not good to be bitten. They eat unclean flesh. The Valada has done all things that can be done, Simon," Benedict said. He had something in his hands, a new pouch that he was stitching out of skin even as he spoke. Simon wondered where the troll might find new darts. Oh, for a sword, even a knife. People on adventures always had swords or sharp wits or magic. Did you tell her? Simon hesitated. Did you tell her about Morganes? I already knew. Jaloi stared at him, firelight reddening her bright eyes. When she spoke, it was with powerful deliberateness. You were with him, boy. I know your name, and I felt Morganes' mark upon you when I touched you as I took the child. As if to demonstrate, she held out her own wide, calloused hand. You knew my name? Where the doctor is concerned, I know many things. Jaloi leaned over and poked up the fire with a long blackened stick. A great man has been lost, a man we can ill afford to lose. Simon hesitated. Curiosity at last won out over awe. What do you mean? He crawled across the floor to sit near the troll. That is, what does we mean? We means all of us, she said. We means those who do not welcome darkness. I have told Jaloi what happened to us, friend Simon. Benedict spoke quietly. There is no secret that I have few explanations. Jaloi made a wry face and pulled her coarse robe tighter around her body. And I have none to add, yet. It is clear to me now, however, that the weather signs I have seen, even here on my isolated lake, the north-flying geese that should have gone clattering overhead a fortnight ago, all of the things that have given me pause in this strange season, she pushed her palms together as in a gesture of prayer, they are real, and the change they augur is real also, terribly real. She dropped her hands heavily to her lap and stared at them. Benedict is right, she said at last. Beside her, the troll nodded his head gravely, but Simon thought he saw a satisfied glint in the little man's eyes, as though he had been paid a great compliment. This is far more than the striving of a king and his brother, she continued. The contendings of kings can beat down the land, can uproot trees and bathe the fields in blood. A log collapsed with a pop of sparks, and Simon jumped. But the wars of men do not bring dark clouds from the north, or send the hungry bears back to their dens in Maya month. Jaloi stood up and stretched, the wide sleeves of her robe hanging like the wings of a bird. Tomorrow, I will try and find some answers for you. Now, all should sleep while they can, for I fear the child's fever will return strongly during the night. She moved to the far wall and began putting small jars back on the shelves. Simon spread his cloak on the floor near the edge of the fire well. Perhaps you should not sleep so closely, Benedict cautioned. A spark leaping out may set you on fire. Simon looked at him carefully, but the troll did not appear to be joking. He pulled his cloak back several feet and lay on top of it, rolling the hood into a cushion beneath his head, then carefully pulled the sides up and over himself. Benedict moved away toward the corner and, after a moment of rustling and thumping, made himself comfortable as well. The song of the crickets had died out. Simon stared into the shadows that flickered in the rafters and listened to the gentle hiss of the wind passing endlessly through the branches of the circling trees and out across the lake. And that's the end of that section, and that's the end of the hour. So we're going to wrap it up, and I will continue with this at 7 p.m. Hello to everybody who showed up after I said the hellos. There's my mother-in-law, Hazel. Good morning, sweetie. Lots of love to you. And there is Rosalba. Hello, good morning. Good to see you. And but with that, I am going to wrap it up and sign off for the morning, night, whatever you want to call it. I thank you for joining me. And again, I will say that for anybody who is not available to hear the next part, obviously you can find it either on my social media or on Chris Fab's very kindly curated YouTube channel. And with that, I say, please take good care of yourselves and take good care of your loved ones. Keep a tight grip on them because you never can tell when one of them may go down to the end of the town and they don't go down with you. To quote an old A.A. Milne poem about James Morrison, Weatherby, George Dupree. And yeah, so that's basically it. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again very soon, either tomorrow at 7 or next week, same time, same channel. And peace and goodwill to all. Bye.